And the state should act to curtail that sort of thing.
Well, I think you're exactly right, and in fact that's what Justices Scalia and Thomas said, is that this is a state problem and it has to be one that's dealt with at the state level. The Supreme Court has tried to tackle the issue twice in recent years, and unfortunately they have failed to be able to do that. But in the past 2 or 3 years, there has been significant reform at the state level. Already this year, North Dakota passed significant punitive damages reform legislation, and product liability reform packages were passed in Mississippi and Arizona and Texas. Anybody else? No? I'm going to be hanging around for a few minutes afterwards. If anybody has questions, they can call Adam DeVries at ALEC or myself directly. I'll have my cards in the back. But again, I encourage you to stop by and pick up a copy of the article to take home with you, maybe read on the airplane. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mark, for presenting yet another set of challenges. The next sessions will begin in this room shortly.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good to meet you.
Nice
Oh, don't get up. Don't leave. Shortly is now.
Sorry.
It's okay. Hello, my name's Bill Myers. I'm with ALEC. I'm with the ALEC Foundation, in fact, the Director of Legislation and Research. And, hey, you listened. You didn't leave. We're going to talk about school choice and the most recent battle for school choice in California, the lessons we can learn from that and from previous work on school choice, and what it might mean in some of your work advancing school choice, some strategies that you might want to consider pursuing to advance this issue. In order to transition well, I'm going to introduce someone who's not on the platform right now. Kellyanne Fitzpatrick is with the public relations firm Luntz Weber. Earlier this year, immediately after the California election, Luntz Weber conducted the only exit poll of voters on Proposition 174, the school choice initiative in California. The information that they were able to glean is, I think you'll find very interesting, I certainly did, and will help us to determine how we can move forward with this issue effectively. So, just to keep things rolling, Kellyanne, why don't you take over?
Thank you, and thank you, Bill. On November 2nd, California voters were asked to vote on Proposition 174, the school choice initiative in the Golden State. Prop 174 would have guaranteed each student, there are 5.3 million in our nation's most populous state, each student would have been guaranteed $2,600 in a voucher that their parents can choose to put toward their education in private or public school. Prop 174 was defeated 2-1 by the voters. But the good news is that the idea and the support for school choice is alive and well in California and other states. Let's take a look at the exit poll results. In looking at them, I believe there are 6 lessons to be learned by voters and legislators in California, as well as legislators across the country. Number 1, California voters voted against Prop 174, not against school choice. Simply put, Prop 174 frightened the voters. They feared that there would be a reduction in per pupil spending, and they feared that there would be David Koresh-type people who would be allowed to start schools unchecked and unaccredited. The ballot language and the assault by the school choice opponents engendered a fear in California voters that this would happen. Unfortunately, being outnumbered and outspent, it was very difficult for school choice and Prop 174 proponents to counter these attacks. Although Prop 174 frightened voters, school choice does not. A defeat of Prop 174 was not a ringing endorsement of the education establishment in California. In fact, in California, as we found across the country in our other polling data, people are very frustrated with the current state of our education system. There's a very pro-parent, pro-child sentiment, and there's a decreasing positive attitude to our teachers' unions and teachers' organizations. Lesson 2 is to be patient in California and elsewhere, because this can happen. Certain language that can go into the ballot initiative certain legislative reforms that can occur, makes this a very, very viable issue electorally. In the school choice debate, you should be prepared for temporary setbacks on your way to a more fulsome victory. Lesson 3, I urge you, regardless of your state, start now. The school choice debate for the next year started the moment the polls closed in California, and it is not too early anywhere. Improvement of education is always a popular issue with the electorate. And in fact, as you'll see later, there's great political capital for you, state legislators, to have this as one of your target issues. Our fourth lesson is to be flexible and realistic. The flexible part is to, quite frankly, give the people what they want. If the certain demands are not met in California, for example, school choice will never pass there. Voters want to be assured that crazy people cannot start up schools where their children will attend, and they want to be assured that it's not going to cost them much more money, and they want to be assured that municipalities can opt out, that everyone will benefit, not just low-income students. And in terms of being realistic, California had an inherent problem of being too populous. As Bill will expound in a few moments, there's imminent passage of school choice in Connecticut. And so you can see, given the different sizes of the states and the population therein, that you may want to go for piecemeal, small victories on the way to a wholesale win later on. Define and clarify again and again. This is critical, and this is where Prop 174 got lost in California. Voters want to know, they want to be told exactly, precisely, what this means to them and their school children. And unfortunately, part of that is going to take money and vocalness and visibility of some type of leader. And I commend you to be that leader in your state. Voters want to know that what they're getting is something that's going to be improvement, not a risk. Because if you're asking them to risk their children's education, even though they're frustrated with the status quo, they're not going to buy it. They'd rather keep what they know and not be completely thrilled with it than roll the dice on something so important. In doing this, you may want to consider going negative. This is something you can only find out in your own state through qualitative and quantitative survey research means. But in California, because they were assaulted so tremendously on the air and through the radios, and even through their own Republican governor, Pete Wilson, they lacked an ability, due to lack of resources, to go negative. But it probably would have helped them to show why the teachers feared an improvement of education so greatly, because it directly cuts into what they're guaranteed. Doesn't necessarily mean it was bad for the school children. Lesson 6 is to do your homework. Stay apprised of legislative efforts in other states. ALEC is an indispensable source of this for you. Let them keep you abreast of what's going on in other states. Bill will expound on this thoroughly in a few moments for you. But also remember that even though Prop 174 and other school choice initiatives are losing at the ballot box, the idea of school choice is winning nationwide. At least in Minneapolis, Baltimore, and I saw in the Washington Post this week, the DC public school system are looking toward the private sector to help them get their system back into control. This is very auspicious to the school choice climate, because it helps you to understand that people are frustrated and governments are starting to have to admit to themselves and to their constituents that it's just not working. And we'll move along now quickly. As I said, school choice was defeated by a 2-to-1 margin. And when we asked people, when you voted for it, were you strongly for it or strongly against it? The intensity is high for both people. Those who voted knew the way they felt, and that's why they went to the ballot box in an election year where there was one thing to vote on: school choice. Of those who didn't go to the ballot box, nearly half opposed Prop 174 anyway. That seems like bad news. You'll see in a moment it's not so bad, because although they oppose Prop 174, they would support a different initiative in the future. You'll see that there's strong opposition among those who didn't vote. But if they really felt that dearly about the issue, they would have voted. And so there is room for movement there. This is a great statistic for California and for others who are trying to draft legislation for school choice. Among those who voted, they would be willing to, 57% would be willing to someday support a different initiative. These are people who voted against school choice this time. But they say if there are certain guarantees next time, they'll go for it. And among those who stayed home, it's a similar number. They'll run to the ballot box in support of school choice if they see something that has more guarantees than Prop 174 was giving them. These are the target groups, at least for California, but we've seen this again and again across the nation, because although lower income voters, lower educated voters, low socioeconomic status, and Hispanics, particularly those groups delineated there, in California, although they generally opposed 174, they are most likely, through our data, to support different school choice initiative in the future. And Bill and I have discussed in the past, perhaps this was because $2,600 in California would not have allowed them to go to the school of their choice anyway, because it wouldn't be supplementing their tuition money. They're probably exclusively dependent on that money for the school of their choice. But if they believe there's more money in the future and that they truly do have a choice, they'll support it. These are the groups that are going to be more difficult to move. These are the groups that either opposed 174 at the ballot box, don't support school choice, and say they probably never would. The problem is it's married with children and it's people who have children in public schools. But these people are scared. They were frightened by 174 and they want to see something different. And here's how we know that. We asked California voters in the exit poll to grade the California education system. You'll see that 3 out of 4 people give the California system a C or less. 13% of California voters believe that the system is failing them, and they would give them an absolute F. You've got 1/3 of the voters giving it a D or an F. And significantly, although we see that public school parents would be very difficult to move in the future school choice support, 77% of them would give a C or below. So they're not thrilled with what they've got right now. They just want to see guarantees, and that's a very important word to you in the future. They want to see guarantees that it actually will be better. This hooks on to the last graph. If people are disgusted with the current education establishment, then it follows that they would generally support a parent's right to choose to use vouchers as to where to send their children to school. And we see that 53% of people do support that generally. There's a very pro-parent, pro-child sentiment across the nation. Of those who oppose, 1/4 strongly oppose. But again, remember, we're asking them a generic support question, yet their only encounter with school choice and parents' choice has been Prop 174. It's very difficult for them to get that out of their minds hours after casting their votes. The pro-parent, pro-child sentiment is carried through in this statistic. We asked, who do you believe is the most credible organization in education in California? And we listed out around 6 or 7 different ones. 1/3 of the voters vote for the California Parent Teachers Association, and that's a 2-to-1 endorsement over the California Teachers Association. So people want parents to be involved. They believe that parents have a right to choose what type of curriculum and what type of school their children are attending. And so goes Republican Governor Wilson's opposition to Prop 174. It didn't amount to a hill of beans in the vote. I don't know if he's seen this statistic, but it certainly is very important for the school choice movement in California and elsewhere. His vocal and visible opposition to the school choice initiative helped garner a great deal of bipartisan opposition to it. And this is a bipartisan issue, as you'll see in a moment, and as you should know in general. But of the 9 out of 10 people who said that his opposition to Prop 174 did not influence their vote, 85% say not at all, didn't consider it at all. Notwithstanding this, there is great political capital in state legislators who want to endorse school choice or make it their target issue. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the most important statistic that you can see today. I want you to take this away from today's session with myself and Bill, if nothing else. Voters will support, half of the voters are more likely to support and vote for a public official who supports school choice. And only 29% said they'd be less likely. And you'll see that the intensity for that is not very strong. The no difference and don't know refused are movable people because they haven't made up their mind. They're not core supporters or opponents of a public official who supports school choice, and they are movement people. People want to see action by their legislators in allowing parents and children the right to choose where they're attending school. Generally, people don't believe this is a Republican idea or a Democrat idea in California, which is great, because this has a great potential to be a bipartisan issue. Bill will tell you in a moment that we're getting a great deal of support from Democratic legislators across the country, and that in Connecticut alone, that will probably be the linchpin that allows the first initiative to pass. Then we asked a series of push questions. We said, voters, if X, Y, and Z were true, or if X, Y, and Z were guaranteed to you, do you agree or disagree that you would be more likely to support choice in education? We asked 5 of them. The first one, I would support choice in education in the future if it did not cost any more money. 2/3 of the people agree with that. With some significant intensity, nearly half of the electorate strongly agrees that they will support it if it didn't cost any more money. And you'll see that in some states it won't. But voters in California weren't aware of this. There was no communication of the message that underlied the initiative provisions. This was the most movement issue to the California electorate, the 5 that we asked. I would support choice in education if it were guaranteed that per pupil funding would not be reduced. In California, I believe it would not have been. But voters didn't know that, and 3/4 of the population said they would support it if it were not reduced. Well, 3/4 of the population did not support Prop 174. We need to bridge that gap between reality, the initiative, and perception, what people believe it is going to create. It's a very significant statistic, and I commend you that if you do go after this as one of your target issues in your respective states, that you make sure you communicate to the voters, per pupil funding will not be touched. However, even given all the economic analyses in this data, people are not interested in having it only targeted to lower income students. Obviously, lower income and low socioeconomic status voters disagreed with this statistic, but generally only 1/4 of the population in California wants it to be a voucher that only helps those who need it most. People want this to go across the board, and it is a viable provision for it to affect every public and private school student in your states. 1/2 of the electorate is interested in allowing separate municipalities, cities or towns, to opt out of school choice vouchers if they would like. This all goes to the whole pro-choice sentiment, the pro-parent, pro-child, the right to choose. They believe that the right to choose should transcend on the state level, or the city and town level, pardon me, and allow different cities or towns whose education systems are working locally to opt out if they would like. It's not a significant number, but it is 1/2. It's not a big push issue. The next one, however, is, and here we get back to the David Koresh fear. 7 out of 10 people agree that they would be more likely to support choice in education in the future if there are adequate and effective safeguards against extremists setting up school. As it read, the California ballot initiative would have allowed you and me and my puppy to start a school. And people thought this, and they believed it, and this hurt. This hurt Prop 174 very, very gravely. But it wasn't the case. It's not the case. We just need to put, I commend you to put the ballot language right into your initiative, if you must, that this will allow you certain guarantees against this happening. And the last graph just shows you how those 5 push questions came out in the end. And what was most important, that's of a total, the highest score you can have there is a 4. And you have funding not, per pupil funding not be reduced to 3.2, and you go all the way down to target low income only, not even a 2, not even half, 1 out at 1.9. So what does this mean to you as state legislators? The California lessons provide us with information for every state. It's not unique to California. You need to make this a target issue because remember, improvement of education and improvement of children's welfare is never an unpopular issue. And an opponent to your idea to improve education and make our schools better and safer for our students is going to have a very tough row to hoe to oppose you on that, to try to convince voters that that's not something that they should be concerned about, and that's not a prudent expenditure of state money. The 3 things that I see are absolutely tantamount to successful passage of a school choice initiative are clear and comprehensible ballot language. Avoid ambiguity. As an attorney, I feel comfortable in saying that maybe you shouldn't get your attorneys too involved in drafting the language. Make it speak to the people. Make it speak to common lay people. You secondly need a message to the voters, and that message is merely just a restatement of what underlies the ballot initiative. What is it providing? What does it mean? And the third part is to clearly communicate that message to all of your voters, broad-based, in a way that either preempts the assault from the other side or sufficiently responds to it. Because that's what happened in California, and that's what happens in general when you are outspent and outnumbered. And finally, get a visible spokesperson. I hope it will be each of you. I hope it will be each of you in your own states. But it certainly doesn't hurt to get your federal legislators involved, some teachers who may support school choice, even though teachers in general do not. And with that in mind, I'll turn it over to Bill. I commend you to get involved. It's a very important issue, and I thank you for your time and attention this morning.
We at ALEC enjoyed working with Lentz Weber and with Kellyanne a great deal in putting this exit poll together. I commend their services to you very, very sincerely if you have need of maybe the best polling firm we have on this issue and related issues, empowerment-related issues available to us. It is difficult speaking immediately before lunch or very closely before lunch. The premium's on brevity, and you'll get it. That's what I'll deliver. The California findings are confirmed by findings from the 2 previous initiative battles on school choice, the 1991 battle in Oregon and the 1992 battle in Colorado. Polling was conducted there, and after we completed the poll in California, we went back and looked at the polling that had taken place in the previous 2 states. It's also confirmed by the experience of early legislative battles in the state legislatures on school choice, most notably last year's battle in Pennsylvania, where we came very close to enacting school choice. What we determine from all of this experience, what our experience is telling us, gives us a few important lessons and implies some strategy decisions that you may want to pursue, and I want to very quickly just tick them off. First of all, every battle for school choice so far has been excessively polite. No one has really attacked the public school system. None of the advocates have put forth a very strong reason to change. That is not the approach you should take. It's not the approach you should take for a number of reasons. First of all, voters are uncomfortable with this issue and must be convinced, no matter whether this is a legislative or initiative battle, that there is a need to change. In this particular case, we had a good block of the voters, about a third, who clearly saw a need to change, the 34% who rated schools D or F. And among those voters, Prop 174 got a majority vote. However, if 1/3 is not enough. 1/3 doesn't win elections, and 1/3 is not the kind of support you need for your legislative battles. You must provide a reason to change, and that means providing very directly performance information on how your schools are doing, because we happen to have the great advantage of being borne out by the facts. Our schools are not doing well enough, and we need to convince people of that. We need to convince voters of that. This is as important in a legislative battle as an initiative battle, because you can't pass legislation in a vacuum. The sort of grassroots support you're going to need for this, has got to be developed and has to be built, because voters don't currently understand it. And that's something that many activists on this issue forget. Many of us, and I suspect many of you in the room, are so convinced in the inherent rightness of this issue that, of course, parents should have the right to select the schools their children go to, that we forget that most voters, while that rhetoric appeals to them, are very uncomfortable about how this actually works. And so, first, we have to provide a reason for change, and second, we need to build comfort levels on how this will work. Now, you should be aware that there are things happening, some of you may be involved in them, that are building that comfort level. Right as I was getting ready to speak, John Fund gave me, which I had not seen, this page from the Wall Street Journal. It is an advertisement for a private voucher, a private school choice initiative that's starting in Washington. These, which have been prompted by Pat Rooney at Golden Rule, exist now in about a dozen states. They exist in Indiana, they exist in Georgia, and they exist in Texas. They're targeted at low-income students, and they essentially set up a pilot voucher program, a private school choice program with private funds. It gives voters some familiarity. It gives voters some comfort level with a private school, with school choice. And if there is an opportunity for you to get involved in supporting this sort of program, it is a no-lose. All you're doing is helping people, building support for an issue that we care about, that we all care about, and by building comfort levels. I strongly encourage you to back these programs where you can. So the first thing is, we have to stop being so polite. We've got to tell the story like it is. This is particularly important because of the second point. This is not an issue on which you can compromise. This is not a typical political issue. School choice is about power. It is about who has power in the education system. The people who have power now, essentially the educrats, are not going to compromise away their power. Do not delude yourself. A private school choice initiative, if it wins the support of the Teachers Association, is not worth your time passing. You cannot compromise this issue, and you cannot build support among those people who are losers, and there are losers. Public school educrats lose power. They know it, and it's why they fight this issue so hard. We have got to understand this, and we have got to take these people on absolutely directly. One way to do it, as I mentioned before, is by pointing out their poor performance. Another way to do it is by dividing and conquering them. One legislative tactic, something that you might want to build into your legislation, for example, is a simple guarantee that no teacher loses their job under a school choice program. Simply guarantee 5 years of employment for teachers. Give them a 5-year, no teacher loses their job for 5 years. That allows you to begin to divide teachers from teachers' unions. That is a tactic, for example, that's being considered in the upcoming battle for school choice in Connecticut. But do not in any way believe that this is an issue on which you're going to gain teacher union support. You will not. They will be against you, and they will spend money like wildfire, and they will probably challenge you the next time you run for election. It's simply that important an issue to them. Happily, it is that important an issue to us too, because it is the way we're going to improve education. So, second point is consider the divide and conquer approach and recognize that you have enemies on this issue. The third lesson we can learn, and I take it away from you and keep this one close to your heart, is that money matters. If you advance a school choice initiative, if you advance school choice legislation which costs more money, you will lose. It was the central issue on which we lost in Pennsylvania, where we came within 4 votes in the House there of winning a private school choice legislative battle. If legislation costs more money, you will lose. The days in which voters would support any initiative that they were told would improve education are happily over. Happily, because the cash cow that the NEA has been feeding off of for the last 20 years is now dead. But what that means is we have to be very, very careful to structure our initiative to respond to the voters' legitimate fiscal concerns. The reverse holds true as well. The reason Connecticut turns out to be a very, very potent, choice turns out to be popular in Connecticut is the other side of the fiscal coin, where capacity is a problem, where new schools need to be built. Voters are very concerned about investing in them, and school choice is an option. You have private schools that can accommodate kids, and that is an option to building new schools. That is, in fact, a very important part of the battle in Connecticut. Voters, particularly in the Fairfield area, don't want to build new schools and want to go to school choice instead. So recognize that school choice can be killed on fiscal grounds and can be won on fiscal grounds too. And structure the initiative, structure your legislation so that the fiscal side of the coin plays in your favor. I got 1 minute. So I will skip to the legislative strategy section and very quickly go through it. Aside from these lessons that we've picked up from other states, one sort of overwhelming point emerges. This issue is much more complicated than many strategists on it initially believed. People do not understand it, and we need to take steps to frame this issue so that people do understand it. Normally, when you fight an issue, you frame it in such a way that a majority of the people are with you. We've sort of assumed that a majority of the people would be with us. We shouldn't assume that. I commend to you an approach that Perry Hooper from Alabama is going to pursue this year. The idea is to advance modest school choice initiatives which put all goodness and light on the side of the school choice supporters and only darkness and evil on the side of the opponents. For example, Perry is going to advance a piece of legislation which gives students a right to choose a voucher, to choose the school they attend if they are enrolled in a school in which more than 10 violent crimes occurred in the last year. All right? Now, that sort of a battle works out this way. The other side, in order to oppose it, has to argue that children should be put into unsafe schools in order to protect the public schools. They can't win that fight. It doesn't win the whole issue for us, but it begins to frame the issue in a way that works to our advantage. I commend it to you. I'd like to see that in all 50 states. I think it would do great things for the school choice battle. And that strategy can sort of spread. Just as it's almost impossible to argue that children should be put into unsafe schools in order to protect some public institution, it is difficult to argue that children should be put into an educationally bankrupt school, a school where 50% of the kids drop out, or a school in which 30% of the kids are functionally illiterate at graduation. Write those sorts of bills for school choice, and you begin to frame the issue in voters' minds so they understand it and put the other side in an impossible political position. In order to do that, you need not only to write the legislation that authorizes it, but you also need to make sure that that the citizens of your state have very solid information on the performance of their schools. If, for example, you allow students with to escape schools with 10 or more